It is July 28th, 1865. 153 men, women, and children stand on a windswept beach on the coast of Patagonia, Argentina, staring at the most hostile landscape most of them have ever seen. No trees, no fresh water, no shelter, just a gray desert stretching to the horizon under a freezing winter sky. One settler described it this way: "If God made the earth, the devil made Patagonia." They had paid 12 pounds each for this. They had crossed the Atlantic for 64 days on a converted tea clipper called the Mimosa. They had been promised fertile valleys, land like Wales, a new home. What they found instead was closer to the surface of the moon. Most people who know this story assume the colony died on that beach. It didn't. What happened next was one of the most extraordinary human experiments in history. A small, desperate group of refugees from a dying culture created something entirely new in the most inhospitable place on Earth. And the evidence of what they built is still alive today, written in the DNA, the language, and the blood of 70,000 people in Patagonia who will tell you, in a language that officially should not exist, exactly who they are. To understand why 153 people willingly walked into a Patagonian winter, you need to understand what they were running from. In 19th century Wales, speaking Welsh was not just unfashionable, it was punished. An 1847 British parliamentary report on Welsh education, later known as the Treachery of the Blue Books, described the Welsh language as a curse on its speakers, a barrier to progress, a mark of moral inferiority. Schools across Wales introduced the Welsh knot, a piece of wood hung around the neck of any child caught speaking their own language. The last child wearing it at the end of each school day was beaten. A Congregationalist minister from Bala named Michael Daniel Jones watched the Welsh diaspora in America lose their language in a single generation. He understood that to survive, a people needed isolation, not integration. His plan was radical. Find a place on Earth where English had no reach, build a new Wales there, govern it in Welsh, teach in Welsh, pray in Welsh. He considered Australia, New Zealand, and Palestine. He chose Patagonia because Argentina offered 100 square miles along the Chubut River in exchange for the Welsh doing something for them, something that would become the colony's darkest secret. But here is what the official histories won't tell you. The Argentine government did not offer that land out of generosity. Patagonia in 1865 was disputed territory between Argentina and Chile. It was also home to the Tehuelche people, nomadic hunter-gatherers who had lived on these plains for thousands of years. Buenos Aires gave the Welsh settlers the land because it wanted European bodies to claim it. And with those land grants, the government also gave the Welsh weapons and military training to use against the Tehuelche. The Welsh refused, not entirely, not perfectly, but in a way that was unprecedented in colonial history. When the Tehuelche first made contact with the settlement in December of 1865, 5 months after landing, the Welsh settlers had nearly starved to death. One settler wrote that they had eaten rats, boiled leather, and chewed grass before the Tehuelche arrived. The indigenous people brought guanaco meat. They taught the Welsh to hunt with a bolladora, a throwing weapon made from stones and cord. They showed them which roots were edible and which water sources were safe. They traded meat for Welsh bread and taught the settlers how to read a land that was actively trying to kill them. The colony survived because of that alliance, and the genetic evidence now reveals that the relationship went considerably further than trade. For the first 4 decades of the colony, the Welsh governed themselves through elected chapels, built Argentina's first artificial irrigation system along the Chubut River, and turned a desert into some of the most productive wheatland in South America. By 1885, their wheat won the gold medal at international expositions in Paris and Chicago. They built a railway. They founded a bilingual newspaper. They named their towns in Welsh, Trelew, Gaiman, Trevelyan, and those names still appear on Argentine maps today. The town of Gaiman itself takes its name from the Tehuelche word for sharp stone, a detail that speaks to what was really happening between these two peoples. But here is what official census records hide. The genealogical data from early Chubut is unusually clean on one side and suspiciously absent on the other. Welsh chapel records are meticulous about Welsh marriages. What they do not record are the marriages and relationships with Tehuelche and Mapuche women who converted, took European names, and were absorbed into the colony in exactly the same way that indigenous women were absorbed and erased across the colonial Americas. Modern genetic studies of Chubut populations show significant Native American mitochondrial DNA markers, always through the maternal line, clustered in the oldest Welsh-descended families. The pattern is identical to the Acadian case. The men are in the records. The women who taught them how to survive are not. This mattered enormously to the colony's survival because what the Tehuelche brought was not just food. It was knowledge of a landscape that European farming methods were completely unequipped to understand. The famous Chubut irrigation system, which transformed the desert into farmland and still operates today, did not emerge purely from Welsh engineering. It emerged from a century of Tehuelche knowledge of how the Camwe River moved, flooded, and receded. The women who carried that knowledge into Welsh households carried it in their bodies and their children, even when the chapels refused to write their names down. The same isolation that locked the gene pool also locked something else, something that scientists did not fully appreciate until linguists began recording the Welsh, spoken in Chubut in the 20th century, and realized they were hearing a voice from the past. Linguists call it Patagonian Welsh. Because it was cut off from the mainland for 160 years, it did not evolve alongside the language spoken in Cardiff or Swansea. It never absorbed the modern English loanwords that now pepper everyday Welsh in Europe. Instead, it absorbed something else entirely, 19th century Spanish terms, and words borrowed from Tehuelche and Mapuche, woven into a grammatical structure frozen at the moment of departure. It is, in the precise technical sense, a linguistic fossil, a version of the Welsh language that Michael D. Jones himself would have recognized, preserved in the dry air of the Chubut Valley while the living language continued to change thousands of miles away. Think of the Latin speakers of the Italian Alps, a community cut off by mountains for so long that they preserved forms of Latin that vanished from Rome centuries ago. Or the descendants of the Guanches of the Canary Islands, whose oral traditions carried sounds and structures that had disappeared from the Berber languages of North Africa. Patagonian Welsh is the same phenomenon, except that in this case we know the exact date the clock stopped, July 28, 1865, the day the Mimosa landed. While Wales was being updated by English pressure, reshaped by industrialization, negotiated away through cultural compromise, the Welsh of Chubut was doing what languages do in perfect isolation. It was standing still, a locked room, a time capsule sealed with desert air. Today, a Welsh speaker from Cardiff visiting Guyman reports the uncanny sensation of hearing their grandparents' generation speaking, turns of phrase they remember from childhood, pronunciations that feel archaic, a grammar that sounds almost formal. They are not hearing old-fashioned Welsh. They are hearing 1865. It is this combination, the DNA carrying Tehuelche ancestry and the language carrying 19th century Welsh, that makes the Patagonian colony so strange and so significant. What was built in Chubut was not a replica of Wales. It was a new organism, part European, part indigenous, evolving in a sealed environment under conditions that existed nowhere else on Earth. Then came the betrayal. Around the turn of the century, Argentina decided the experiment was over. The government that had invited the Welsh to colonize Patagonia now imposed direct rule over the colony. Welsh was banned from schools. Spanish became mandatory in all official functions. The Welsh language was stripped from the one institution that had protected it, the government that the settlers themselves had built. In 1900, a third of the original Welsh colonists packed up and left for Saskatchewan, Canada, rather than submit. Those who stayed watched their children be educated in a language chosen for them by a government that had always seen them as useful bodies, not as a people. Michael D. Jones died in 1898, 2 years before the Argentine government dismantled everything he had built. He never saw it. But here's the final twist that history forgot to record. Jones had spent his entire life fighting for Welsh survival against one empire. The colony he built was used by a second empire to erase a different people. The settlers who came to escape colonization became colonizers themselves on Tehuelche land. They knew it. Some of them wrote about it. And the genetic record now shows what the documents could not say out loud, that the boundary between those two peoples dissolved over generations in the most human way possible. Today there are around 5,000 Welsh speakers in Patagonia. That number may seem small, but consider what it represents. In the Guyman area of Chubut, there are communities where Welsh is spoken as a daily language more than 160 years after the first settlers landed. In 2024, the number of registered Welsh learners in the province rose to over 1,100, up from 623 just 4 years earlier. The language that a British parliamentary report in 1847 declared dead is growing in Argentina, among the grandchildren of the people the Argentine government tried to absorb. And then came the moment that proved everything. During the 1982 Falklands War, British soldiers from the Welsh Guards were sailing home with 11,000 Argentine prisoners of war. On one of those ships, an Argentine prisoner of war made his way to the Welsh soldiers and began speaking to them in Welsh. He was from Puerto Madryn, the town named after a Welsh estate. built on Tehuelche land, governed for a time in the language of a chapel in Bala, Wales. He was everything the colony had become: Argentine and Welsh, indigenous and European, colonized and colonizer, a living genetic record of a compromise that official history never fully wrote down. The Patagonian Welsh are not simply a curiosity. They are proof of what happens when a persecuted people flee one empire and land inside another one. They are proof that identity is not determined by blood alone but by the choices made under pressure. And they are proof, written in DNA and in a living language 8,000 miles from the country that tried to kill it, that you cannot erase a people simply by refusing to write their name in the records. If this story made you think differently about what a nation really is, hit subscribe for more stories like this one. What happens when a people refuse to disappear is always worth knowing. Thanks for watching.